Okay. A little after 10, I will call our meeting to order. And Jim, you want to read the minutes, please?
Yes, sir. President Jack Baker called the Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting to order at 10:05 a.m. with 17 members and guests present virtually. 132 people have viewed the YouTube video. Secretary Jim Terry read the minutes of the April 17th meeting, and they were approved as read. Treasurer Ruth Faulkner's financial report was read by Vice President David Hampton. Total monies as of May 15th, 2021 is $14,646.87. The report was approved as given. Maribel Chase gave her Cherokee Moment presentation about the Cherokee insane asylums near Salina and south of Tahlequah. Maribel explained how these institutions showed the depth of compassion the tribe had for those less fortunate. The insane, blind, and those with other disabilities were cared for in these homes established by the National Council in 1873. Troy Wayne Petit told us about the National Trail of Tears Conference hosted by the North Carolina Trail of Tears Association chapter that starts September 20th, 2021 at the Cherokee Resort in Cherokee, North Carolina. Presentations, field trips, and mound tours, and a tour of Manitou Cave where Cherokee syllabary can be seen on the walls will be offered during the conference during this 200th anniversary of the Cherokee syllabary. Becky Hobbs announced that she'll be singing in Catoosa Friday, July 9th. Anna Smith announced a Moravian event October 3rd to 5th at the Cherokee Girls School in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Jack Baker was our featured speaker. Jack's presentation was the Tulsa Race Riot and the Cherokee Freedmen from the Goingsnake District. President Baker adjourned the meeting at 11:20 a.m.
Okay. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion for their approval.
I move.
Second.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye of approving the minutes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The minutes are approved. So David, you have the treasurer's report?
Yes, I do. Okay, the total checking as of May the 17th was $5,977. We had income of $1,542, of which $1,173 was the final grant from the state of Oklahoma, and the rest of it was dues, which would have been about 400 and something. And there was one payout for a stop payment that Ruth says has since been corrected of $28. So the total checking now is $7,492. The CD beginning balance was $8,670. Interest earned $2. CD balance $8,672. And the total money as of today is $16,164.
Okay. Are there any questions or any discussion on the treasurer's report? If not, it'll stand approved as given. Okay. And now it's time for Mary Dale's Cherokee Moments that we always look forward to.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Good morning, everyone. My Cherokee Moments for this morning are documents and acts from the Cherokee National Council and the Senate. These records have been microfilmed by the Oklahoma History Center at Oklahoma City. Many libraries around the area have these different various rolls of microfilm. And what I'm going to read to you this morning. The first three proceedings that I'll be reading, I have given previously several years ago at our Goingsnake meeting in Westville. And then the remainder after the first three proceedings are things that I have not given. And these proceedings are located on roll CHN 8. And this roll of microfilm contains Cherokee National Records, Cherokee National Council and Senate records that includes journals, acts, proceedings, messages, proclamations, resolutions, and some executive department papers. And the first is an act relating to the public archives, that the committee of two authorized to convey the remains of John Ross, principal chief, to the Cherokee Nation for interment among his people, be authorized and instructed to receive from the executors of his estate or other persons having possession of them all books, documents, and papers belonging or pertaining to the archives of the Cherokee Nation, and deliver the same to the executive of the nation. And this was done at Tahlequah, October the 17th, 1866. And as you note by the date, this is shortly after the Civil War. And James Vann, president of the National Committee, Allen Ross, clerk pro tem, John Young, speaker of the National Council, R.B. Ross, clerk, and this was approved by Lewis Downing, assistant and acting principal chief. Being enacted by the National Council that the sum of $500 be, and the same is hereby appropriated to bring the remains of John Ross, principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, to be buried in his country, and the principal chief is hereby authorized to issue his warrant on the National Treasury for the same. And this was done at Tahlequah, December the 1st, 1866, and approved by William P. Ross, principal chief. And as most of you know, Chief John Ross died August the 1st, 1866 in Washington, D.C., and was first buried in Wilmington, Delaware. So on December the 1st, 1866, they appropriated this $500 to bring his body back to be buried among his people. Excuse me while I get to the next one. Resolved by the Senate and Council that a committee of two be appointed by the President and Speaker from each House to make the necessary arrangements in regard to the funeral of Captain Smith Christie. Resolved further that the expenses incurred by said committee shall be defrayed by the nation. And this was done at Tahlequah, November the 28th, 1867. Charles Thompson was president pro tem of the Senate. Stephen Foreman was clerk of the Senate, and it was concurred in. T.B. Wolf was clerk of the council. Art Scraper was speaker of the council pro tem, and this was approved by Lewis Downing, principal chief. An act readmitting William Harnage and family to the rights of Cherokee citizenship, be it enacted by the National Council that William Harnage and family, and in parentheses, Cherokees, who have resided in the state of Texas, end of parentheses. B, and they are hereby readmitted to all the rights of Cherokee citizenship according to the laws and Constitution of the Cherokee Nation. Done at Tahlequah, November the 13th, 1868. John Young, Speaker of the Council. T.B. Wolf, Clerk of the Council. Concurred in. Stephen Foreman, Clerk of the Senate. Pig Smith, President of the Senate. And this was approved by Lewis Downing, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. Whereas the council has this morning learned of the decease of one of their members, the late Daniel Backbone, member from Illinois District. Therefore, be it resolved that both houses suspend business until 2:00 tomorrow p.m., and that at 1:00 the last remains of the late Daniel Backbone be interred at the public burying ground of this place, and in parentheses, Tahlequah, in the presence of both branches of the National Council, and that the principal chief be, and he is hereby authorized to appoint some person to have a coffin made and to obtain such other articles as will be necessary in burying the said Daniel Backbone in a suitable manner, and that the expenses of said funeral be paid by the nation, and that a black crape be worn by the members of both houses on the left arm for 30 days, and that the remains of the late Daniel Backbone be brought to the lower house at 12, and then in quotes it has M, tomorrow. Done at Tahlequah, November the 26th, 1867. Art Scraper, Speaker of the Council Pro Tem. T.B. Wolf, Clerk of the Council. Concurred in. Charles Thompson, President of the Senate Pro Tem, and this was approved by Lewis Downing, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. Resolution authorizing the Principal Chief to appoint a suitable person to superintend the burial of Bud Grits, President of the Senate, who died on the night of the 1st of December, 1867. Resolved by the National Council that the Principal Chief be, and he is hereby authorized to appoint some suitable person to superintend the burial of the late President Grits, either at the public graveyard in town or at the residence of the deceased. The said person to be appointed shall pay or cause to be paid all necessary expenses attending the said burial, and report to the National Council the amount thereof, which amount shall be paid by the Cherokee Nation. And this was done at Tahlequah, December the 2nd, 1867. Charles Thompson, President Pro Tem of the Senate. Stephen Foreman, Clerk of the Senate. Concurred in. T.B. Wolf, Clerk of the Council. Art Scraper, Speaker of the Council Pro Tem. And this was approved, and I appoint T.B. Wolf to carry out the provisions of this resolution. And this was done by Lewis Downing, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation. And this concludes my Cherokee Moments. But I want to make one observation. I think that it's so interesting of how the deaths and the burials of some of the prominent members of the Senate and of the Council was carried out by the Senate and the Council. and I've always noticed such reverence to the people that were deceased. These Senate and Council records will also include some information about the schools in the Cherokee Nation, and just different various things, because in carrying out the acts and resolutions that the Cherokee National Council and Senate performed, there are just various records, and very interesting. And I just need to delve more fully into these records. But that's just an observation. And so anyway, thank you for listening.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Mary Bell. At the very beginning, when you talked about John Ross dying and bringing his body back, did it also say the Cherokee National Archives too?
Yes.
So,
Yes, it mentioned that all the books and all the documents and anything pertaining to the Cherokee Nation, that was supposed to be turned over by the heirs or anyone that had those documents or books or articles or papers, that they were to be turned over to the nation.
unfortunately, they were brought back to the nation, but not turned over to the nation, because that's where John Ross's grandchildren, 2 granddaughters, sold Thomas Gilcrease the John Ross papers that are there. And then the grandson sold them to Penelope Allen in Chattanooga.
Yes.
30 of those are at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, which includes those 1838 and 1842 claims.
Yes.
So unfortunately, they got scattered.
Everywhere.
Yes.
Need to repatriate them back.
Yeah. At least I think we're getting them back digitally for the most
Right.
part. So, okay. Thanks, Mary Bell. Oh, Wanda, did you have?
Just a minute, I'm trying to get unmuted here. Did the 1838 claims, are they digital as well?
Those will soon be within, well, I think as of now, well, they're not on the National Trail of Tears website, but they will be very soon in a searchable
Okay.
database.
Okay.
To go in, I think they finished that up yesterday, and I'm supposed to go in and check it out this weekend, and it'll go live online probably in the next week or two. So if you go to the Trail of Tears Association website, then you can see all the 1838 claims, because they found them, I think, at 5 different locations.
Wow.
Majority of Tennessee State Library and Archives. There are a handful at the University of Tennessee, and there's Penelope Allen collection there. The Gilcrease has a few. The Oklahoma Historical Society had the Book of Alabama claims from the John Bench detachment. And University of Oklahoma Western History Collection had the one book that they digitized for me 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that'll be part of it. There's still a few claims that are missing, but we'll have the majority of them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And then we can start with the 1842 claims after that.
Okay.
So, okay. Okay, do we have any old business to discuss? Well, under new business, we're planning to have our picnic at Concord next month, our first in-person meeting since February of last year. So David, you've got that set up with Donna, is that right?
Yes, Donna questioned our board and they said they'd be happy to have us.
And I talked to Lanita Guthrie this week and she's excited about it too. Now, what we can do virtually, we're not sure what we can set up at this time, but we're going to try to have it virtual as well. And I mentioned to David that perhaps in the future, maybe every other month, that we just have a virtual meeting and not an in-person meeting. Or maybe we only want to meet in person quarterly and have the other 2 months virtual. Because it is a lot, well, it's certainly a lot easier for me, but I think that way we can bring in people from all over the country.
Yes, it's been really nice to be able to join with everyone, even though we're physically far apart.
Right. Thanks, Becky. I agree, and I think we need to continue that. And I'm thinking it's actually probably easier to do just a regular Zoom meeting rather than an in-person. So that's my thoughts, and I guess at Concord we can vote on that and see what people want to do.
I agree, and I think I recruited a member from Puget Sound last night based on the video chat, so he'll be mad at me if you stop doing it.
Right. Well, I would like in person that we still be able to do it virtually along with the in-person, but a combination of the Zoom and in-person, which we can do, and hopefully we will. We'll see what we can come up with for Concord next month.
So are you anticipating August being a meeting back in person, or that hasn't been decided?
That hasn't been decided for sure, but my thoughts is to have it back to Zoom.
In August?
Yes.
Okay.
And then just.
I'm glad you're doing both when you do have in-person meeting. I'm glad we're having Zoom along with it. I think that's important.
I do too, and that's what we're planning, so we just need to be sure that we're able to do it. And I think that they had the Wi-Fi at Concord now, that we can do that. So, okay. Do we have any other business? Okay. Or any announcements?
Becky, you announce your event in July?
Oh, yes, yes. In fact, yes, I was thinking about that. This event is sponsored by the Route 66 Native Arts Alliance, and Betsy Swimmer is spearheading this event. But basically, on Thursday, July 8th, from 6 to 8 at the Belladonna Event Center, there is a launch gala for the sponsors. If any of you all are members already, or if you want to join up before that date. But the main thing I wanted to advertise is that we're doing a show Friday night at 7 p.m. at the same venue for the sponsors and the donors. And you can donate as little as $25 or even less. I mean, there's sort of a blank place where you can do that. But the main thing is the show for the public on Saturday, July 10th at 1 p.m. at the Belladonna Chapel. It's a beautiful new event center in Catoosa, just 2 miles north of the Hard Rock. And my husband, Dwayne Shockwell, will be playing with me. And if you've ever seen him play guitar, he is a world-class guitarist. So I'm very excited for the two of us to be able to play again for a live audience. And I believe I'm going to be posting more details as I get them from Betsy. I think she's sort of putting this together as she goes, but it'll be on my Facebook page, Becky Hobbs, Friends and Fans, and also on beckyhobbs.com. And I'm going to be getting a lot more info from her later today.
So Curtis, you want to announce the Oklahoma chapter fall meeting of the Trail of Tears Association?
Well, tentatively, we plan to have it October the 9th, Saturday, October the 9th. David is working on this, and hopefully it will be in Tahlequah, and that'll be the first meeting we've had since, well, we didn't have one in 2020, so hopefully we'll have a lot of our members as well as visitors come.
And
This week, Curtis, to talk to Colin Mays and reserve the room for us, and it's available. And I'm intending that we'll be having a marking that afternoon up near Pegs for James Downey.
it's
And
Mary
Peter
Bell's.
Smith will be our speaker as far as we know now.
And Anita's from Cherokee, North Carolina. Is a very good speaker. Okay. And Anna, your program is moving along. You're on mute.
Yeah, it really is. So we're doing addition to, it's October the 6th in Salem. It's an entire day that celebrates the Cherokee women who came to Salem. There are 13 of them, and it'd be really fun. It begins in the morning with a church service at Home Moravian Church that will be geared to the girls and the Cherokee connection. Their records will be open to the public in the library. Part of Old Salem will be open. The gunsmith shop where Timothy Vogler was, who worked in the Cherokee Nation as a gunsmith from time to time. The doctor's house, which has an exhibit on Anna Rosina's herbs. The Moravian Cemetery, where some of the teachers of the girls are buried. And the Moravian Cemetery is so interesting. So that'll be fun, and people explaining that. The Trail of Tears movie will be playing. I hope we're going to be able to get one of the bike riders to come and maybe host that. That afternoon, we'll have a plaque dedicated to the 13 girls, which will be on the campus, a big plaque that will stay there forever. In our museum, we've just done a history about the girls that came to Salem. And I just think it'll be a wonderful event. That evening will be a Moravian chicken pie dinner for everybody attending. And of course, an unveiling of the plaque. So please think about it. It's the 6th of October, and it looks like October is just going to be full of events. You would love Old Salem. You just can't imagine. Closer to the time, I'll show some slides so you guys can kind of get an idea of what it would be like to come. So please put it on your calendar.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Anna. It'll be a good event. There's also a reception the night before.
Yes, there's a reception at my house the night before. Yes, sorry.
Good. Okay. Well, I hope a lot of you can attend. It'll be a pretty special day.
It's a celebration of women. We don't do that too often.
Not enough.
You know.
So. And the bike riders made it in yesterday. It was a very nice ceremony in Tahlequah.
Yay. Oh, exciting.
But Anna was back at the beginning with the bike riders and myself, so she kept talking about the women involved in the Cherokee Nation. Okay. Well, today we're happy to have Joseph Erb with us, who's worked many years with the language with the Cherokee Nation and is now with the University of Missouri. And he's done great animations. And he's going to talk today on Sequoia and the Celebrate. So Joseph, we appreciate having you with us today. He also worked for the bike riders on theirs for 2 years. I don't remember the removal. Was it 2 or 3 years?
2.5.
Okay.
And if you can, yeah, there we go.
I think you can share your screen there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here, Sierra God. Let me just get my screen pulled up. Yeah, so, you know, speaking to a bunch of historians is always a little daunting task. So I thought what I would do is actually give more of an overview of technology history in Cherokee Nation and the technology, including the writing system, but others because it starts to merge later on. This is a piece of mine that I did in copper, taking the Southwestern design in making it more into a contemporary style. Now, the digital orthography was a long process in the making. And in fact, I'd argue that it actually started with Sequoia. But I'm at the University of Missouri, as Jack mentioned, and I've been there a few years now. I guess technically I've been there since January of 2016. But I've been back in Oklahoma 2.5 years. I had a research leave, and then when COVID hit, I just taught online. So I've actually haven't been in Missouri for a bit, but I'm still employed there, and my paycheck comes from there so far. So let's talk a little bit about Sequoia. Almost anybody that knows Cherokee history understands that Sequoia was a real pivotal role of not only doing our writing system, but giving credibility to indigenous people's intelligence. And this is, you know, he wrote his name in syllabary with the S character on there, and the only writing system that we actually have in there shows that he actually spelled it that way as well. So when I came in, this was done, I started this in 2000. It was the first computer animated Cherokee show back in those days. And our writing system didn't work on computers quite right. In fact, the only thing that we had was a version made by a grad student at Yale. And basically, she took the writing system and changed the English characters into syllabary. And it was the only really way to type at the time. And so this was done in Photoshop. And it was quite a difficult task to put in there. And if you notice what they call kerning, the spacing between letters is not quite accurate. And it was quite difficult. And it's based off of the typeface that was done on the printing press, which isn't always that great for digital media. If you'll look at the top line, the second character to the right there, or the second character at the end of the right, there's a S character, and it has a very thin line over it. And as that gets smaller in digital devices, it gets to blur, and it's harder and harder to read. And so this is kind of the things that happened in social media. But before we get too far into how technology works in our writing system, I do want to go back just a bit and discuss the early days of the writing system in Cherokee Nation. And of course, this is the boundaries on the map. And I'm going to bring up maps later on, and why that's important is the understanding that the Cherokee Nation in this area was an area of a lot of things going on. And if you realize that the technology and arts and language that was going on was just a piece of the overall development of Cherokee Nation, from industry and writing and cultural complexity. And then they're getting, bombarded with settlers coming in. And of course, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was quite a devastating blow. And then they actually used the writing system for submitting it to Congress when they won in the Supreme Court, and that was known as the Rosas Scroll, which many of you already are aware of. But the original writing system was cursive, and the cursive writing was quill and pen. And English cursive, as many of you, and so was I, was trained when we were growing up, cursive writing was how you dealt with, because of the quill and pen, making lines that continue so the ink doesn't just stop. So print letters weren't developed as well because the ink would fall out. So if you just wrote print with a quill and pen, it would often drip more readily. So cursive writing was developed in a lot of languages because of that form. But printing presses had a different system, and the way the ink worked, cursive writing was actually a little bit difficult for printing presses, and so that technology developed print. And in that, there was different elements of the reasons why print looks the way it does. Yeah, so this is this S character, I'll just go back just a bit, is not great for digital media, and this was made for a printing press. But the original writing system here in the old country where Sequoyah developed it was done with the quill and pen. And this cursive writing was at the Gilcrease. And of course, it was adopted in 1825 by the council after Sequoyah finished it. And again, I spelled his name how he spelled it. For a while there, even at Cherokee Nation, the S was not put on. And then somewhere about 2010, we were looking at old documents and we started to use the S because we figured if he was signing his own name with the this S character in the front, then we figured we probably ought to follow his wishes and sign it the way that Sequoyah signed his name. But this writing system from the printing press is similar in the sense that most languages have a more bold, solid shape than from the cursive writing. And even in English, as we have cursive, we have changed to a block print when it comes to digital media. And so the block print is also developed in that system in there. And so we have all but lost our cursive handwriting. So this is the only version that we've actually found of cursive is the image.
Joseph, it's also interesting if you look at the German script that the Moravians used. If you look at the, it looks almost identical. And
so yeah, of the cursive script here.
Yes.
Yeah, and even if you look at the block print, it was obviously influenced by other things around them. And the block print here, people say, well, that looks a lot like English, and then there's also looks like Greek. But this printing press typeface was developed, came out of 3 different foundries in Boston. And these printing presses, they brought these things in, and so they had different ones that they were created, and the other ones that were probably most likely from different languages, from English to Greek or Russian. They have similar looks of that as well. And also you'll notice that in Cherokee, this goo here looks like the Lee. And so many times, if you watched how they printed things, they would just turn the block print, the face upside down to use those characters.
Yeah.
And you'd even see this in a this version with a gi, which here's the ga over here, and this gi, they would sometimes do it with even the G, which is the TSA sound. They would turn that Y upside down occasionally. So you'd have these different variants, even in printing, that you would see them using the same characters to different characters switched and flipped over at times to do that in the printing press. So they were very resourceful in how they did it. And what Jax is talking about too is the influences that the other cultures that are around were certainly evident in that writing system. And when you talk about the idea of, Cherokees having influences, one of the biggest ones was the fact that they were a society that were really, developed with women as a primary role of families and control. So the reading there's different versions of how literate Cherokees were, but by all accounts, it was super high, and it was obviously over 50%. Some say 50 to 60, some say 80 to 90. But regardless of those different numbers, Georgia and the whites around them were quite low, into the teens or even lower in some cases. And I believe that the reason you get such a high rate of literacy is that women were able to read, and of course they taught their children. And it's hard to get a society above 50% if you don't have your women educated. And so because of this, you have literacy in Cherokees pretty high, certainly higher than the culture around them. And of course, many of you already are familiar with the Cherokee Phoenix that came about. And this is a paper, the second one, this came back in 1828, and the first one was in February. And of course, this actually was one of the biggest papers that were being reprinted and distributed into in Europe. And actually those papers that lasted in Europe helped us later on when we were doing Unicode. And so there was a lot of knowledge base on our writing system, even when we started doing stuff in the 90s and 2000, that actually benefited us. So our ancestors that were involved in getting this paper done benefited us later in the technology. But of course, we were removed from our homelands unjustly into Indian territory. And this is where we've been since then in Cherokee Nation. And this is, of course, a sans serif font. Sans serif meaning that it doesn't have a lot of the fancy stuff, and it's a bold font. So this is Chalagihi Ayetli, which is like Cherokee Nation. And I want to go into a little bit about this and talk about technology in general, because for much of mainstream society, even at that time, if you look at papers from Georgia, or if you look at stuff later on in the mid 1800s to the late 1890s to 1920s, people really pigeonholed Native people as being backward. If you look at the development of technology, like even the phone was developed, Hicks was 16-year-olds, and he was a Cherokee guy that went to the World's Fair, and he saw the phone, and he really wanted the development of these phones. And so there's different accounts of this historic event of bringing the phones to Cherokee Nation. And of course, Cherokees adopted telephones even before the white areas that did. So this was like the first phone west of the Mississippi. And I also wanted to say a little bit about Will Rogers, who we all know about him as the Cherokee Kid and all of the movies that he made, and he was the highest paid in Hollywood at his time. But he also had his radio show, and he bought radios for Cherokee school kids. And so he still gave back to community, and the relationships that he actually had, even from the Eastern Band to here, he gave radios so that Cherokee children could listen to the program. And I think that's kind of an evident idea of community connection and development in technology. So the printing press came in, and even when they came back to Oklahoma or got removed into Indian Territory, they got their press going again. And of course there's different iterations because the press went in and out. So the Phoenix, or at least the Cherokee newspaper, as it had different titles over the years, was printed and then not, depending on the events that were occurring historically that was going. But throughout those times, Cherokees were always developing and redeveloping the printing press, even into the typewriter phase. And I didn't always realize to the degree of how this occurred, because we're not trained in our school systems or even our communities of how this long legacy of adapting newest technologies to the Cherokee writing system. Of course, this is a typewriter that's at the Sequoia Museum here in Cherokee Nation. And so as that developed, you had people like Dodie Yule. And Jack, do you know who this is?
No.
That's Durbin Feeling.
Oh, is it really? Okay.
So a young Durbin Feeling in the late 1960s started working with the language, and this starts to become important later on. Now, he was doing a lot of stuff in phonetics, but he worked in over 14 books in his life, and whether he wrote them or co-authored them, He did 14 books and a lot of different articles. And his writing, he taught a lot of people how to write Cherokee. And a lot of the translators today in Cherokee Nation were trained by Durbin. In fact, when we had people out from Google, I didn't even realize all the, 20 years of working with everybody. One of the Google people asked where they learned to read and write. And 12 out of the 14 speakers that were there learned it through Durbin Feeling, which, I never knew, even though I was close to a lot of people. So through that, his writing system of Sequoia came about, and you had people like Durbin really training a generation of people throughout different communities, even before Cherokee Nation became a more powerful entity economically, and you had people in the community training people like Durbin did. And then throughout that, in the 1960s to 1970s, you have font designers like Herman Zapp, and who passed away in 2015. Steve Jobs commissioned a Cherokee font from him, and they started developing a font in 1976 for computer systems. And this actually never got into computer systems, but he was paid for it. One of the things Steve Jobs really wanted to do is make it where languages with large type population, like a lot of glyphs, which means a lot of characters beyond English, could be in computers. For example, Chinese had thousands of characters, and they literally had teams of people bringing in these boxes of typeface that were very heavy to print things in Chinese because it was so vast. Cherokee had a less of amount, but it was still quite a bit. And what Steve Jobs was wanting to do is to show that computers were a much better system for large typeface numbers for them. And so he developed this with Herman Zapp. And you'll see that, even back in the 76, even though we weren't writing Sequoia with the S in the front of it, Herman Zapp even did his research and found that document in Tulsa and wrote Sequoia's name appropriately. And then in the mid 90s, you had Michael Everson, and Michael Everson's an American, and he actually writes code so languages will work on computer systems. And he contacted an older now Durbin Feeling in the 1990s and asked about trying to get this in Unicode. And they developed this together to get the writing system of the syllabary so that computer systems could adopt it. And so how computer systems work is that every character has a numbering system on it. So English has a number on it and letters that actually call up that letter. So lowercase a has a number and uppercase a has a different number. Well, so does the A, E, O. So all of these have numbers and letters that will call it up, and then the font is what shows. But if you have different fonts, like for example, if you want to use Helvetica or Times New Roman, you can just switch it out. But the numbering system is the same for that letter and character, and it allows you to actually switch out fonts. But in the adoption of this, you had to do several things. You had to put the writing system into an order, and you also had to start working on this. So Michael Everson and Durbin worked together. It got adopted, but never adopted into computer systems. So they put it into Unicode. They wrote Michael wrote the code for it to be adopted, and then it just never went anywhere. It just sat in the Unicode archives waiting for someone to adopt it into a computer system. And that's where I started coming in. So I started working with this, and when I would actually do this in my animations, it was quite difficult to put the titles in it, because anytime you did anything, let's say if somebody translated that and sent it to me, sometimes the letters would get switched around, and then I would render it out, send them a copy, and they were like, well, I didn't type it that way. Because imagine if you typed a sentence or your name in an email and it went to someone else and the letters were jumbled up. And that's where we were with Cherokee until we adopted into Unicode, because it didn't have these point systems. So even when we got into immersion program, the computers that typed this up would have to be typing it and print off from that computer, or if it's transferred in any way, the speaker would have to go to that next computer and double check all their work that some of the characters didn't switch. So when I came out of grad school, I started working with the Cherokee Immersion program as it started to develop. In fact, I actually was in all the meetings when it was being started, but when it was just in grant form, really. And this is where we were at in the beginning. This was a second grader, and it was handwriting mainly in Cherokee Immersion. And of course, all the materials were made in the curriculum department on the computers that they needed to be just directly to a printer so we could print out stuff for the classroom. And during this time, I would make animations in Cherokee for kids, and we would put them on iPods because, of course, the iPhone had not been developed yet or anything like that. So we would put these on these little iPods for the kids to watch because the majority of the kids in the immersion school were young. But by second grade, we knew we had to do something different. And so I started first we reached out to Microsoft, and we found a Cherokee guy, Tracy Monteith, that was at Microsoft, and he was connected well enough to get us a meeting at Microsoft. And so we flew up there and we tried to get connected to get our language on computer systems there. And when we met with them, they said, you know, there's a place in India that has over 10 million speakers, and it's a tech industry place. We don't support their language. Why would we support you? And that kind of was disheartening. I didn't know what to say, and because we weren't going to pay them, we just wanted our language on there. So we went home, and because I used Apple products a lot, I reached out to Apple, and we started working with Apple. We got invited out to get language on computer systems, and this was the first introduction to the computer that we did in the classroom that worked in Cherokee. And so these kids who I'd known since they were 3, they were now in second grade. We gave them all laptops, and or Cherokee Nation gave them laptops, and then I developed a keyboard so that they could actually see the Cherokee syllabary on their keyboard. And you'll notice that it's just a plastic overlay where you can turn on the Cherokee and then type and see the letters in there. And of course it has English if you need it, but the larger characters up and down are in the syllabary. And that went well. We started to run servers out of Vegas because the Cherokee Nation's IT department was not too fond of us using Apple, and they wouldn't allow us to use our computers on their system. So we had to run the entire process out of computers in Vegas. We rented computers in Vegas for the Cherokee Immersion program. And this is a blog. All their homework was done in Cherokee, of course. And with these computers, because Microsoft had not adopted it yet, we all ran Apples, and we basically ran these computers off of servers in Vegas so that we could use that. So I got onto the Unicode Consortium board in 2010, and when this got adopted, so that we could get into, we started working with Apple. Well, a guy named Peter Lofting got us involved with the Unicode Consortium, and we got our language adopted into it. So that gave us the ability to start to get onto larger scale technology devices. But you got to convince computer companies to do that. And so we were working with Apple, and it took 2 years. But after development, in September of 2010, the Microsoft iOS, which is the mobile operating system 4.1, came out with Cherokee. And this, on the version on the left, was my original design of the keyboard, and they adjusted it to follow their processes. And recently, as in 2 years ago, the Android phone adopted my original design of the keyboard. And so there are 2 different keyboards, but this is the original one that I came up with. I submitted different versions over a 2-year period to Apple, and eventually they took pieces of it, improved it in a lot of different ways, and it came out there in 2010. And of course, the news release came out in January 23rd, 2010, and it hit 600 newspapers the first day in the United States and went across the world in recognition of an indigenous language on these iPhones, which were very popular at the time. And that allowed us to do text messaging. It allowed us to do our contacts in Cherokee, our folders. And so our language started to work on things. And here's what it gave us: credibility as a major language in the world. And if you think about the idea that the 109th language in the world had 10 million speakers, and they weren't on the iPhone. And the iPhone at the time had less than 20 something, and we were one of them. That it was a really big, and we weren't paying anybody. We were just giving presentations similar to what happened in Cherokee's fighting removal and some of the abuses that happened. Cherokees went up to, you know, Boston and Philadelphia and gave presentations and tried to build things. We actually went out to Silicon Valley at our time and started doing this. And we got things like the first digital books on iPads. So you were able to do that. And this one, when I worked on this, I remember staying up late, and I didn't translate. So I'm not a translator or a highly fluent person, but I had these documents, and I worked to get the encoding to work to build some of the first books. Then we moved into getting the Cherokee Phoenix in Unicode, because like I mentioned before, that even when this was in printing press, and we've noticed that for the last 20 something years, Cherokee Nation has done this syllabary and English still. It was a very arduous task for one of the translators to actually type it on their computer, send it to the Phoenix. They'd have to go over to the offices and re-edit all the work, because it couldn't just be transferred just like an email copy and paste that we did in English. But once we got the Cherokee Phoenix on Unicode, it basically allowed for things on the line to be searchable. So just like in English, you could do it, because all of our syllabary until that time was just an image file, which means you couldn't search databases or anything. And then we started developing fonts, and you'd see people in different places adopting. This is a handwritten font that I did, and it was starting to do into like cartoons and stuff and comic books. Well, after we got on the iPhone, Google called. It's always weird if somebody from Google calls you. You don't like, is this a joke? And so I worked with a lot of translators, and we translated the Google search engine. And in this case, we were the 51st language to be on the Google search engine, so that we could Google in Cherokee. And our curriculum was able to actually be on mobile devices as well. And of course, text messaging started to be more popular, and I became more illiterate because I could see Cherokee every day in my phone. We worked with Google also to do Gmail. So we'd have all the stuff in Gmail. So folders and messages and all of that could be done in the Cherokee syllabary. And we had to develop technology terms. And for email, the translators, and I believe Durbin came up with this one, is Nagalisk Goweli, which means this is lightning mail. It's kind of a neat term to be using, lightning mail. And then some of the people I met at Apple, one of them had a college roommate that ran servers at Facebook. And so I started bugging Facebook for a couple years, and we got Facebook to be able to do and adjust the localization where you could see all the different folders and stuff in the syllabary language itself. Then finally, after being rejected so many times from Microsoft, after we gave some presentations, we got invited back up to Redmond to meet with Microsoft, and we got on Windows 8, was our first operating system, all in the language, and we were able to do that as well. But we worked with a lot of people. All of these works are done with community involved and a lot of people working. And of course, Windows 8 had over 1.5 million translations, which took a team of translators to do this. And this is a group of people that worked on it. I'm the goofy guy right over here. And of course, I'm not a translator, but we would take all of these documents and hand them out and get them in and retype them up and give them in. We had weekly deadlines for 1.5 years, and we had to meet every deadline or they would drop us. So it was quite stressful time. And so Windows 8 got finished. In this process too, I ended up doing the bike ride. I ended up, as things happen at Cherokee Nation, they give you projects and you just take them. And I did this one and I got invited out to Google, a completely different group. These are large corporations that most of the groups don't even have interaction or very little interaction with each other. But when I started mapping out the journals and geolocating them, I got invited out to give a presentation on it at Google. And I started building a relationship with the mapping team. And in that time, I changed jobs from Cherokee Nation to the University of Missouri, but we started still developing these fonts. And what was really amazing about it is that now, you know, some quite years later, you could easily find different fonts for different purposes and type it up and get that done really quickly and not have the problem of our font not, our language not working on computer devices. In 2017, I worked with Apple to do a handwriting app, so you can text handwriting and it draws itself out, but they needed some sample handwriting. So I provided sample handwriting in the summer of 2017 so that our language would be able to go out and have that feature on the iPhone as well. And in that time, in 2018, all these fonts that we started working on with companies started showing up. And this is in my Honda Accord. I bought a Honda Accord, you know, and I certainly had nothing to do with Honda on any level. But one of these fonts that I worked on with Monotype, it was a subsidiary group that was paid by Google for their phone to get Cherokee on. I worked on this font with Durban, and this font started showing up on Honda Accord and all the Honda products. And that's just by chance. It was so weird that it was now starting to go into all these different technologies and places that I had no interaction with. But my relationship with Google continued, and I kept pressing them to get Cherokee Nation on Google Maps as a nation. As everybody here understands that, you know, indigeneity and indigenous nations should have recognition as nationhood, not below states and not below counties. And one of the misconceptions most people have about indigenous tribes is that they're not just like organizational structures of, you know, these backward communities of social services, they're nations. And so pushing Google, I first almost got all the 500 and something tribes on Google Maps, but they were going to use a incorrect data set from the Census Bureau, which actually cut around town, especially in Oklahoma, because it was a secondary thought to add tribes in. And so we held that off, and it kind of slowed the project. But then I used the McGirt case to get the 5 tribes on the maps. And in 2020, after petitioning them, and this is in CNN, if you ever Google CNN Cherokee Nation, you'll see the article about it, and it talks about a little bit about some of the issues of getting that on there. And of course, we used the Muskogee Creek lawsuit for the justification, and 2 weeks later, because they had all the data, they were able to release that. Of course, I'm still doing animations in Cherokee, and I've been commissioned by Cherokee Nation to do a 3-episode series. And this is Rabbit Stories, and it's set in Tahlequah. I spent 2 years modeling downtown Tahlequah, so it looks familiar. And of course, it has the immersion school, and we use immersion school content in there. But all of the work that we do, from all these writing systems, from technologies to mapping, 200 years in, our language is in cars, it's in phones, it's in every digital device you buy at Walmart. Cherokee's already on there with fonts that are developed. And I used to think that I was special when I started this process doing animations, but I realized later on that we're just a long process of different Cherokees continuing and adapting to technology. And I've never really done any project by myself on anything, from the movies that I produce to the animations to the tech work. It's always been in a community. It's always been with administration. I've worked with all the different administrations in my work time to do things and to make arguments, and different community people. And you know, I think that's how we are as Cherokees. We've made the biggest advancements as a team, and we stay together in that way as well. And just like these organizational structures of passing on the important knowledges of our history that this one does, we do it in groups. And I certainly appreciate your time today, and I'd be happy to take any questions too.
Does anyone have any questions for Joseph?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. When I got on that Google map that you were talking about where they show the Cherokee boundary lines, when
Yeah.
you blow that up bigger and bigger and bigger, the boundary lines go away. Were you aware of that? And why is that? Because what I was trying to do was figure out the exact boundary line between Hulbert and Wagner, where I go out of the Cherokee Nation there, but I can't figure that out because those boundary lines are off when you get the map blown up really large.
That is a great thing. So even when I started this process, what they did is they said that our first iteration would be just showing it. The second iteration is actually getting it shown permanently. And then the third one is showing above states. So we're in our first stage. And I think what's really going to push them is that this next company, another company that I'm working with and worked with before, is going to do a bigger push in the fall. And what they're doing is they're doing a slow rollout. And our slow rollout is just recognition that you see it and it's like a little ink blot. But the next stage in the next 2 years or so, you'll be able to actually see it as a border, like you would, like more like a state right now. And our bigger argument is that we are above states because obviously, as most people understand tribal issues, they're federal laws, not state laws. And our argument is that we need to be shown above states at the very least, if not as a complete nation itself, but definitely above states. So this is our first version, and our next version, you'll be able to do what you're talking about, being able to see that really distinct boundary. And so this is our first process of getting in, and hopefully by late fall or early next year, you'll be able to do what you're talking about, is actually seeing those boundaries, like even up to the block of the street. And that's kind of where we're trying to go in that process. But it's a very good point. It drives me crazy too, because when I try to show somebody that you Google search it on a Google map, you see it, and then if you move too much, it disappears.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
I don't, oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just have a comment. I just want to thank you. I mean, I think I have a tiny little CD or something that I got when you were at Cherokee Nation, and you must have been a boy. Jack, I can't remember what year. It was 100 years ago, because I'm 100 years old. Anyway, thank you for this work. I mean, this is amazing. I think it's just wonderful. And I just want to thank you. And I love it that you have this passion. Anyway, thank you, Joseph.
Well, you know, I'm always inspired by you guys. Like, you guys are going over like amazing documents. You find all these like amazing historical events in these remote places and hidden in books and libraries and microfilm. And it puts things like this into context that gives us credibility to make these arguments that we are a nation, you know, because when we first started this, you know, people go, well, you're not very big. Why would we help you? And my argument was, well, the United States population-wise isn't that big compared to India and China. Why should they have any control over anything? And you start to use their arguments against them to say, you know, size isn't the important thing. You know, this is our homeland. In fact, when I went back 2 years later to Microsoft to do Windows 8, when we got up there, we went into this restaurant, and the German lady met us, and she said the project manager, the new one that took over, is going to not do Cherokee. And I was like, what? We just flew here to do this. And they were like, you know, and the guy came in, and I was like, well, show me where he's at. And because I wasn't just going to leave back to the hotel. And I was like, well, why aren't we being shown? And he goes, he had an assistant that spoke for him. And he says, well, my mom speaks a language in Europe, and I forget what it was. There's 1 million speakers there, and we don't support them. Why would we support you? And I was like, you're on our land. How many indigenous languages do you have represented? I said, I saw your map, and it said you only support English in the United States. In Europe, Africa, you have dozens of languages. You're on our land. That's why. And he said, well, we tried this with an indigenous group before. And I said, yeah, you tried it with the Mohawks, right? He goes, yeah. I said, so the Mohawks came to you and asked you to do it? He goes, no, we went to them. I said, exactly. I came to you. We'll do it. I said, we've already done Google and we've already done Google, Facebook, and Apple. We've proven that we can do this. And so we made the argument, and luckily I'd been rejected enough to come up with a better answer.
Becky, you had a question?
Yes, I just want to say I'm so amazed at your talent, your dedication, your contributions. I've known about you for quite a while, but I'm totally blown away, and thank you, Wado. And also, I've always seen Nanyehi as an animated character, so you'll be hearing from me.
Okay.
But yes, because without Joseph, we would not be where we are today with the technological companies at all. And Cherokee people owe Joseph a great debt of gratitude for all he's done. We do appreciate you, Joseph. Any other comments? Well, once again, we appreciate you, Joseph, and thanks for your presentation.